Hey everybody, welcome back to The Art of Change, episode 4. I am Tony Stark Fernandes, the Change Catalyst, and I have with me for the last episode is Kevin Boss. Kevin, who are you?
Hey everybody, welcome back. I've got a background in leadership, organizational leadership from Colorado State University, working on a master's in organizational psychology with a future plan for a PhD, obviously in psychology. And I've been in law enforcement for 20 years, military background of 6 years, but still active in law enforcement where I started as line level, and I've gone through the ranks all the way up to division chief over criminal investigations.
And thanks again for being here. We're going to final out with everything we've learned. Let's recap. Episode 1, we talked about evolutionary leadership and leading with empathy, human-centered, change-driven type of leadership and how we want to get there. We talked a lot about, different techniques and principles and core values that dive into all these different things. And today what we're going to really go into is how you sustain that type of leadership style and leading with empathy and for the long haul provide success for the organization. And I think one of the key things I really want to focus on is talking about development of our leaders and not talking about just, middle management, but like leaders across the board, right? Offering everybody the ability to take these classes, workshops, attend these conferences, things that just help us grow as individuals. And so when we look at it, again, I'm going to throw more data like I like to do. So key facts, organizations with strong leadership development programs are 1.5 times more likely to be in the top quartile of financial performance. And so when you think about, if I'm investing and spending all this money on my people to develop them as leaders, and in turn, are you getting them back right away? Well, no, in long term, you're getting that 1.5 times greater that financial success, right? And so when you look at that, also another study that we found was that Deloitte showed that companies with effective leadership development programs have a 37% higher revenue per employee and are 9% more likely to grow than their competitors. And so really what we talk about here is when you're investing in your people, the revenue generates higher, your retention rates are driven much higher, and overall the culture grows and becomes more successful, and all because you chose to invest in your people. And so as we look into this, what I want to talk about first is looking at continuous learning and self-improvement, right? Because there are a lot of people think about empathy, like leadership development is all about developing leaders, but sometimes it's developing us as people, right? And how do we develop ourselves as people is crucial. So some of the self-improvement things. So what are some strategies that you have or can think of to help with growing as a leader and working on that self-improvement?
Yeah, leadership is a constant cycle of improvement, of learning, of engaging, of challenging, of changing. And so think of it like a gym membership, right? So if you go to the gym and you stop working out, you probably start to lose muscle. Leadership, same way, right? So you got to continue to work on it. So how do you do that? You go to school, working on a master's, PhD. That's going to help in my leadership developments. You read books. More importantly, go to workshops. And I think, Tony, you could probably talk a little bit about some workshops, some keynotes that you do, yeah?
Yeah, that's right. So we do offer, workshops and keynotes on evolutionary leadership. Selfless plug there, everybody. But yeah, having workshops brought to your organization and having keynote speakers at different engagements, HR conferences, things of that nature. Anytime that we have the ability to either bring someone in or to send our people to any of these type of things really just helps rejuvenate and give them new skills and techniques to empower that force. And that's all that self-improvement. I mean, if the audience here, think about any time where you were able to go to a summit, a conference, and it was something that you were going to get out of it, right? And it might have been resiliency. God, there's my four thumbs. And it's when you think about those type of things, when you look at let's exclude the for work for a second. Where are places that you go to rejuvenate yourself, right? To make yourself go, man, I feel so much better than I did at that retreat. These are the same ideas, but what we're doing is also trying to give techniques back to those members to bring to your organization to help them succeed. So that's a good point on there. Is bringing up let's talk about those leadership development, right? So what are some opportunities you've seen in your career that have helped do leadership development in your lifespan?
Yeah, so we do a leadership retreat in our organization every year for anybody who holds a supervisory role, whether it's a civilian or it's a sworn member. We host a leadership retreat. And that is exactly what we're talking about, sharpening those skills, maybe finding a new tool to put in your toolbox that you've never heard of, or it's a technique you've never heard of, or it might be a theory you don't know about. And we put that on to develop, to coach, to mentor, and to continue to sharpen our leadership skills at all levels. It's important for everybody who's a leader. So it's important in my mind to have workshops and when you make it as an annual thing in your organization, it's easy. You're required to do it now. We're going to do it at least once a year, but it's a system of continuing to improve. Because if you think about it, who's mastered leadership, right? Like there's no like, I've got it, I'm done. Right. Because the minute, like back to that, talking about the gym, the minute you stop, perfecting it and coaching yourself or coaching others, your skills start to diminish and to diminish and to diminish. And so it's a constant battle to, improve on.
Yeah. And I think one of the things I want to talk about is a little sidestep of this, but as I think about leaders often have to make hard decisions.
Right? Oh yeah.
And I think there's two types of leaders that I've found in this scenario, right? When you talk about leaders that make decisions to be popular and leaders that make the hard decisions that are not so popular, right? Yeah. And sometimes when you have to make that hard decision, how do you get the support of your people who work with you, right? And I think where that comes from is by having a high trust culture environment. Mm-hmm. Because if I'm the leader and I have to make a hard decision, but my people trust my decision-making process, they're going to follow. And sometimes they say, I'm not quite sure I understand why we're doing this, but let's do it, right? Tony would never lead us astray, right? Kevin's not going to put us in this bad situation, right? So even in those hard decision points, we understand that by building that high trust environment for our people, we in turn are also creating an environment when hard decisions have to be made. We don't have more toxicity build off of hard decisions. We have more followers who understand how to go after the greater good of the mission for the company and the organization versus I'm sick of this decision, I'm going to leave, or I don't agree with it, or whatever it might be, right?
Yep.
And so it comes back to when you create that environment, things improve across the board.
Absolutely.
Right. And so let's talk about here real quick, feedback and self-reflection. One of the things I think is really important to talk about, one, feedback. John Maxwell talks about 360-degree feedback. It's been a big topic for a long time. I'm a huge advocate for that. Sometimes that can be hard to get that, especially when you lead in a very positional authority type of organization. But feedback is really, really crucial. And it's about giving constructive feedback. Not a put down session. It's how do we improve if we need improvement? How do we, where are our successes? But feedback needs to be done across all the, spectrum, right? Like it's not just a feedback session of all the bad things I see, because then people are going to assume every time they come to talk to you, it's all bad, right? So we got to work on our feedback loops. But also what's important is we need to train our people to do self-reflection, internally look in and say, where did I need to improve on? Where, recognize, take accountability and ownership of our scenarios. Good and bad. That was me right there. I crushed that position, but I didn't do so well on X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. And I think why that's important is because what if, let's say I'm going to use Billy and Sarah. Billy excels in one area, but is weak in another. But in that weak area, Sarah excels. Rather than be competing, and I wish I was better at this stuff that Sarah does, but man, I'll just have to work on it. Why not work together? That's where the collaboration piece comes in, right?
Yep.
So highlighting, as a leader, one of the things you can do that's really well is see where your peoples are, and you can either help build their weaknesses to be strengths. One of the other things you can do is also plug in people's strengths where we see weaknesses. Simon Sinek talks about when you hire, an organization, if I'm, in a board member, for example, and let's say I get into an organization and I'm the smartest guy in the room, right? Simon Sinek hits this one, right? I hired the wrong people, right? We want to empower our organization, hire all these people that are going to do really great things and then plug them in places where they're going to succeed. All of them can succeed. It doesn't need to be this competition, right?
Yeah.
And that's crucial, I think, when we start talking about feedback, because feedback is how we get people to those levels that they desire to be at. But we also need them to self-reflect. Otherwise, it becomes toxicity.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with that in mind, what are some of the things that you do for implementing feedback loops or feedback mechanisms?
Yeah, it's important to always relate it back to strengths and weaknesses. Like if we're going to evaluate something, let's talk about what do you feel went well? What's an area that you think we can improve on? Simon, I love the fact you brought up Simon because he always has good things. He recently talked about stop telling people they failed and tell people they fell. And you think about that, like that's an important feedback. Because if I say, Tony, you failed today, I shut you down. But if I say, Tony, it's okay, we fell a little bit, and that's okay because we're going to get back up.
Right.
Failed is an input, right? So falling or fell is I'm going to get back up. You fell off your bike, you get back on. If I said you failed riding your bike, you don't get back on.
Right. Like, how do we innovate?
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
You have to make several opportunities of developing something to find the right answer.
Yeah.
And if we're afraid that we don't get it on the first try, you're not going to innovate. And I think you and I
100%.
offline, we talked about Elon Musk, right?
Yep.
Got to hit the guy.
Yeah.
Took a program, something that was thought to be impossible to do. His idol, Neil Armstrong, told him, "You're never going to make this work."
Mm-hmm.
And had he given up on the first try, we would never have SpaceX and the ability to do what we're doing today with the space program.
Right.
And so things like that are important because look at Neil. I'll use an example. And Neil Armstrong's done a lot for, in his life and, obviously amazing things. But in that moment with Elon, he was not a leader. He did not empower Elon to continue. Hey, this sounds impossible. If you think you can make it work, do it, my friend. Try it. See what you can do. Come up with an idea. But that sounds so far-fetched, but I would be blown away if you can pull this off.
Right.
He missed an opportunity to be a success story with Elon by encouraging him and instead tried to get him to stop doing what he thought was impossible.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a really good point, especially when you look at Neil Armstrong is a great leader. He was a great example, but even sometimes great leaders have down days.
Yeah, totally.
Right?
Yeah.
And so also that's self-reflection. What if Neil Armstrong came back and went, and he might have, I haven't seen it, but what if Neil Armstrong came back and went, I was wrong. You crushed it. You took something and now they just came out with the thing that's catching the.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that's
crazy.
10 years ago, that would have been unheard of.
Yep.
No way you're gonna be able to pull that off, right? That's crazy. And it's awesome to see stuff like that. And now I'm gonna go off another tangent, but it's like when we deal with children. Yep. We tell, oh, Billy, that's gonna be impossible. You want to be a doctor? Maybe you should, focus on being a construction worker, right? Yeah. We don't want to tell people these things. If they have a dream, let's let them pursue it, right? Empower them to pursue those dreams, right?
Go get it. Get it.
So let's translate that to your organization, right? Yep. If you have a member who has an idea, just because you can't fathom how to do it yourself doesn't mean it's a bad idea. Mm-hmm. And as long as you empower them to say, hey, if it doesn't work the first try, if you keep going and trying until we say, okay, that path isn't right for us right now, doesn't mean it's not something in the future, but today is not the day for that. Let's find another thing. That's our job. Our job is to develop these people. And part of the way to do that is to allow them to innovate and express themselves.
Yeah.
Right. And so leadership development is huge in that. One, develop that leader to empower that member, but then also develop those members.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. If we don't develop people, if every leader today in your organization won the bazillion Powerball, whatever, and every leader in the organization today left, every leader, no matter how small, whether it's a first line or it's all the way up to the CEO, could your organization survive? And if the answer is no, you're not working hard enough to develop people. And that's hard. You should self-reflect. You talked about self-reflection. I constantly self-reflect on, am I developing my people? Am I coaching them? Am I mentoring them? Am I providing them feedback that's constructive? Because I'm not going to be in my position forever. I'm filling somebody else's position right now.
Right.
So if I would ask the audience, who right now, if you say you won $1 bazillion, who would take your place tomorrow? And if you can't think of somebody, you got to change that.
Yeah, we have to stop being afraid of being. Nobody likes the word replaceable because one of us want to feel special, and that's totally understandable. But at the same token, then we fear competition again.
Yep.
Oh, somebody's going to replace me. Yeah. As long as if you're doing your job and you want to stay where you're at, no one's going to replace you.
Correct.
But what if we can replicate what you do and bridge that across the organization?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Or what if someday you need to get promoted and we need somebody to jump in after you?
Yeah. And that can happen.
We have to stop thinking of this in a competition because then again, what are you doing? You're living in fear.
Yeah.
I'm fearful of losing my job, or I'm fearful of being replaced. Good leaders create good leaders.
100%.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that's crucial. I mean, I'll give you one story of mine. Great leader I had, 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, without telling me, taught me a concept of just show up for your people, be there for them. And he did that by example. Didn't have to say it, did it by example. And I was very apparent when I was asked to go to the retirement ceremony. I showed up, and this person for the last 20 years had somebody show up from every piece of job that he was at.
That's awesome.
To the middle of a nowhere town that we were in at the time for his retirement, just to celebrate him. And I got to hear stories of things that this man did just to show so much empathy and care for his people. And it showed in that room. These people became better leaders and showed up because of the actions that this individual did. And it was, to me, that changed just watching that. And if we could replicate that and push those to these different organizations, we would have so much more people who have value and so much more success in our work centers and in our country.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's a big one I want to hit there. The last one I really want to talk about is, what role does adaptability play in sustaining effective leadership? How do we apply adaptability when we've learned these techniques, right? If I want to keep these techniques moving, these are the same things, right? So how do I adapt?
And I think,
what am I adapting to?
And I think failing to adapt is an end of course, right? And think about the examples you shared in the prior episodes, and even today. You look back at Microsoft. Had Microsoft as leadership, as a CEO, not adapted, Microsoft wouldn't be around today.
Or definitely not in a
at least
strong
not
capacity.
Right. You have to adapt. Leadership has to adapt. Multiple reasons. Look at generations. So you look at the workforces that come in generational gaps. You can't have that same style, or you look back to like when I was a parent, not how I parent is different than how my kid or how I was parented by my parents.
Right.
I have to adapt to my employees. They don't adapt to me. I adapt to them.
I think that's I love that you said that.
It's about them.
There's a lot of leaders out there that go, well, you need to adapt to my leadership style.
It's terrible. It's
terrible way to lead, right? And so at the end of the day, and I hate saying a negative word, but I would call that lazy leadership. We adapt to our people because our job is to work for them, not the other way around. We serve them,
correct,
to help them do what we need them to do, right? To succeed as an organization. And I think what's crucial when you talk about that type of leadership style, right, is what's some of the weaknesses there when you immediately see that. What are some of the weaknesses you see beyond that?
I think it's a fear to relate.
Yes,
a fear to relate it's crippling. In your part of a generation, in your style, that is really kind of going back with like time.
Yeah,
there are new ways. There's new systems. There's new techniques. There's new technology. There's new, you think external impacts on an internal organization. Climates are changing, right? I mean, you might be working in an area that's never been hit by a hurricane. And now, bam, we have to adapt. I have to provide maybe a level for my employees that we haven't had to maybe provide for. But you talked about COVID and one of the other ones, and working remote. Yeah. You want to talk about adapting. If you didn't adapt, you lost. Game over. Right. Failure to adapt shuts down organizations or reduces the workforce. And really just doesn't focus about the employee.
Right. And when, the last thing you hit was, we talked about Microsoft and Satya Nadella, and we talked about the adaptability. And what I thought was really interesting about the adaptability was when I was reading about Satya, right, I was thinking in my head, I'm like, well, where have I seen success from Microsoft in the last decade? I really, I haven't really heard the name pop up a whole lot. Because Microsoft didn't need the kudos.
Yeah, exactly.
The organizations that they adapted with, brought on as they acquired them, they continued to thrive as that organization. Activision is still a powerful organization. ChatGPT under OpenAI. But those are Microsoft. But Microsoft doesn't need their name to be on it for them to be successful.
Exactly.
And I think it's important for us to think as leaders is also, as a leader, my name doesn't have to be on my people's work to be successful. My people will make me successful because I'm their leader. Microsoft is the leader of these organizations. They are success. And at the end of the day, if you want to look at data numbers, right? If I'm running Microsoft and I took it from 300 billion to 3 trillion, I think I hit my data numbers pretty good.
Yeah, I'd say you excelled.
Yeah. That's quite the turnaround. So, hopefully this series for everybody help teach empathy in action and really dive deeper. This series was really just to help explain evolutionary leadership and leading with empathy. But really, if you want to build on your leadership style and really get into this, Start Consulting Services, we do offer keynote speeches, and we have for workshops on both motivational interviewing and evolutionary leadership. So if you're interested in bringing Start Consulting to those organizations or events, please feel free to reach out at startconsultingservices.org. And please stay tuned for our next series of The Art of Change. I'm not going to dive into it yet, but stay tuned and I'll let you know what's coming on the next podcast series. Thanks again, Kevin, and everybody. Stay tuned. Appreciate it and have a great rest of your day.